I count things for a living. Assets, liabilities, the exact date a signature was witnessed. So when my mother called me on December 20th and told me my children weren't welcome at Christmas because my brother's girlfriend thought our family was too classy for your chaos, I did what I always do when someone hands me a number that doesn't add up. I wrote it down. My family didn't know that yet. This is the story of what happened when they found out. Welcome back to Wise Dad Tales, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts and family learns that boundaries have a price. If stories about dignity, documents, and consequences are your thing, drop a comment and subscribe. I'm Elena. I'm 38. I've spent the last 12 years as a trust and estate attorney, which means I spend my days reading the things people write down when they no longer trust the people around them to remember what was promised out loud. Wills. Trusts. Letters of intent, tucked into folders because a person knew, somewhere in their body, that memory is negotiable, but paper is not. I learned that lesson at work long before I needed it at home. My husband David used to tease me about it. He'd catch me labeling the folder for our own documents, insurance, deeds, the kids' birth certificates, and he'd say, "You know we're not clients, right, Elena?" I'd say, "Everyone's a client eventually." He laughed at that more than the joke deserved. He had a laugh that filled a kitchen. We were married 9 years before a heart that gave no warning stopped giving one at all, on a Tuesday, at the gym, 3 years ago. I did not cry at his funeral in front of anyone. I cried in the parking garage afterward, alone, for exactly as long as it took the meter to run out. Then I picked up my children and made dinner, because that is what the calm ones do. We absorb. We do not fall down where anyone can see the shape it leaves. My family has always run on a particular kind of arithmetic, one I didn't have language for until I was old enough to bill by the hour for noticing patterns like it. My parents, Walter and Carol, raised 2 children and quietly decided which one was furniture and which one was china. My brother Nathan was china. He got the extra chair pulled out at dinner, the benefit of every doubt, the assumption that his choices were simply misunderstood by people who didn't know him the way our parents did. I was furniture. Useful. Load-bearing. Never fragile enough to need handling. When David died, I became the executor of my own grief, and my family became, without ever discussing it, the people who called me for logistics and not for comfort. Who's picking up the caterer? Can you look at Dad's insurance paperwork? You're good with that. Nobody asked how I was sleeping. Everyone asked if I could review a document. I didn't resent it, exactly. I want to be precise about that, because precision is the only gift I have to give this story. I told myself it was simply what I was for. Some people are warm. Some people are useful. I had made peace with being the second kind of good. My father died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in March, gone by September, fast the way that particular disease is sometimes almost merciful in its speed. I flew home 11 times in 6 months. I sat in hospital rooms with binders. I coordinated hospice. My mother cried in every room of that house except the ones where decisions were being made, and in those rooms, it was me and a legal pad and my father's hand finding mine on days it still had the strength to. Nathan visited twice. Once for a weekend, once for the funeral. Both times, our mother told everyone who'd listen how hard it was on him, how sensitive he'd always been, how some people just aren't built for illness the way others are. I am built for illness, apparently. I am built for a great many inconvenient things. It's useful, being built that way, right up until the day it isn't. My father left a will. He also left something my mother didn't know about, which I'll get to, because that document is the reason I'm telling you this story at all. But before the discovery, there was the betrayal, and the betrayal came dressed as Christmas. On December 20th, my mother called to finalize plans, who was bringing what time to arrive, the usual choreography of a holiday I'd hosted, attended, or funded in some capacity for the last 15 years. Then she paused in a way I recognized immediately, the pause she uses before she says something she's been asked to say by somebody else. Nathan and Vanessa think it might be better, she said, if the kids sit this one out. I asked her to repeat that. Not because I misheard. Because I wanted it on the record, in my own memory, exactly as spoken. Vanessa's parents are coming this year, my mother said. She wants everything to feel a certain way. Elegant. And you know how Mia and Sam get, sweetheart? They're wonderful, but they're a lot, and Vanessa said, my mother's voice actually dropped, like she was reading off a card she didn't fully believe in but had agreed to deliver. She said we're a little too classy for your chaos this year. Too classy for your chaos. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be honest about what I did instead, because it matters more than what I felt. I opened my laptop while my mother was still talking, and I typed the sentence into a note titled December 20th, timestamped automatically at 6:47 p.m. Underneath it, I wrote, Vanessa Hollis, via Carol, Mia, 9, and Sam, 7, excluded from Kaplan Family Christmas. Then I asked my mother to send me the text where Vanessa had said it, because I wanted to make sure I had the wording right for the kids' calendar. My mother, who has never once suspected that asking a lawyer for exact wording is not a neutral request, forwarded it without hesitation. Screenshot, timestamp, sender, all intact. It's a document now. It will always be a document. I sat with that screenshot for a long time that night after the kids were in bed. Not to grieve it, exactly. I'd stopped expecting warmth from that house years before Vanessa arrived to formalize the policy. I sat with it because some part of me, the part that reads deeds for a living, understood immediately that this wasn't really about Christmas. This was a family renegotiating who mattered, out loud, on the record, and assuming, the way people always assume when they've never once had to answer for anything, that the woman who absorbs things would simply absorb this too. I filed the screenshot. And I waited, because I already had an appointment on the calendar that would end up mattering more than any of them understood. 6 days after that phone call, I sat across a conference table from my father's estate attorney, a careful, silver-haired man named Preston Adair who had drafted my father's will 9 years earlier and, it turned out, one other document my mother had never seen. My father had set up an irrevocable trust 4 years before he died. Preston walked me through it slowly, the way you walk someone through anything that's about to reorder their understanding of a person they thought they knew completely. The trust held the lake house, the one my mother had spent 14 months assuming was simply hers, the one Nathan had already, my mother mentioned once in passing, started describing to Vanessa as the family place we'll probably fix up. The trust named 2 beneficiaries. Not my mother. Not Nathan. Mia and Sam. My father had written, in his own words, in a letter Preston handed me in a plain white envelope, that the house was to remain in trust for his grandchildren until the younger turned 25, administered by me as trustee, with the explicit instruction that it never be sold, mortgaged, or gifted to satisfy any other family member's needs, however the request is framed. I read that letter 3 times in that office. I did not say anything the first 2 times. On the 3rd, I noticed the date. My father had signed it the same week I'd flown home for his first round of chemo, the week Nathan had been too sensitive to visit. There was a second document in the envelope, smaller, a single page. My father had also left a note, separate from the legal language, addressed to me by name. It said, among other things, one line I will carry until I stop breathing, you were never furniture, Elena. You were the only one holding the room up. I didn't cry in Preston's office either. I folded the letter along its existing crease, put it back in its envelope, and asked him, in a voice I recognized as my professional one, what the timeline was for formal notification to the other named parties. He told me. I wrote it down. I didn't tell my mother or Nathan what I knew. Not yet. What I did instead was watch, for 3 weeks, as my family made plans around money they did not have and property they did not own. My mother mentioned, on a call in early January, that she and Nathan were talking about doing something with the lake house this summer, opening it up properly, maybe having Vanessa's family up. She used the word "are" 3 times in that sentence. I let her. Nathan called me the following week, the first call he'd initiated in over a year that wasn't logistics, and asked, with the particular ease of a man who has never once had to ask for anything twice, whether I'd looked into Dad's paperwork yet, and whether there was a rough number I could give him, because he and Vanessa were starting to think about the future, and it would help to know what was coming. I asked him one question. I asked what he thought Dad would have wanted for the lake house. Nathan said, without any pause at all, I think he'd wanted to stay in the family, obviously. I said that was an interesting way to put it, and told him I had a few things to finish before I could speak to anyone about the estate in detail. Then I hung up and I called Preston, and I told him to prepare the formal notification letters. If you've ever watched people who couldn't spare one afternoon suddenly find all the time in the world once money is involved, you already know exactly where this goes. Stick with me. The notification letters went out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, my mother called to invite me to what she called a family dinner, a phrase she has never once used for an event that wasn't actually about something else. Nathan and Vanessa's engagement, announced 2 weeks earlier, was the official occasion. I understood the real one before I hung up the phone. I told her we'd be there. I did not tell her I'd be bringing a folder. I want to describe the room because the room mattered. My parents' dining room, the good china out, 12 places set, my mother's version of elegance laid over a house that had, 14 months earlier, held a hospital bed in the living room and a binder of medication schedules on that same table. Vanessa sat at Nathan's side in a dress the color of money, and when I walked in with Mia and Sam invited, this time, because excluding grieving grandchildren from an engagement dinner would have looked, even to this family, like too much. Vanessa's eyes moved over both of them the way you'd assess a stain. Nathan stood before dinner was even served and made a toast. Somewhere in the middle of it, he mentioned new beginnings for the whole family, and the lake house finally getting the attention it deserves, and I watched my mother nod along like a woman ratifying a treaty she believed had already been signed. When the toast ended, I asked for the floor. My mother, visibly relieved, waved me up, the way you'd wave up someone you assumed was about to hand over the keys. I did not raise my voice once during what came next. I want that understood, because calm is not the same thing as weak. My family had confused the two my entire life, and I had let them because it was easier than correcting people who weren't listening. I was done making it easier. I opened the folder. I placed the first document on the table, the trust, dated and notarized 4 years before my father's death, and I said its name and its date before I said anything else, the way you enter evidence, not the way you make an accusation. I placed the second document beside it, Vanessa's text, screenshotted and timestamped, too classy for your chaos, 6 days before my father's trust attorney confirmed to me that the lake house belonged, in full, to 2 children currently sitting at that table eating rolls because their mother hadn't been able to find a sitter on short notice. I watched my mother's face do the thing faces do when a story they've told themselves for years meets a document that doesn't agree with it. Soft first, confusion, a hand at her collarbone. Then emotional, Elena, why would you bring this here tonight of all nights? Then, from Nathan, loud, a chair pushed back, a voice raised about how typical it was, how I'd always made things about myself. How dare I embarrass Vanessa in front of her own parents? Then, when I didn't rise to meet any of that, something colder from him, something closer to threat, a sentence about lawyers, and we'll see about that. I met each escalation with a quieter sentence than the one before it. I told him the trust wasn't a negotiation. I told my mother the letters had already gone out, that Preston's office could answer any question the family had, that none of what I was saying tonight was new, it was simply the first time they were hearing it. Then I placed the last item on the table. My father's letter, the personal one, the single page. I did not read the whole thing aloud. I read one line. You were never furniture, Elena. You were the only one holding the room up. Nobody at that table said anything for a long moment. My mother had gone very still. Across from her, Vanessa's father, a quiet man who had said almost nothing all evening, looked at his daughter with an expression I recognized, the particular disappointment of a parent realizing, in public, exactly who their child had chosen to become. It wasn't absolution. Nobody at that table earned any that night. But it was the only genuinely honest thing that happened in that room, and I noted it, the way you note anything true in a room built on the opposite. I closed the folder. I told my mother the house would remain exactly as my father intended, held for Mia and Sam, untouched by anyone else's plans for it, however the request is framed, which had been his phrase, not mine. Before I left, I said one more thing, to Nathan specifically, quiet enough that only the table heard it. I told him that our father had spent the last 4 months of his life making sure no one could ever again decide, without consequence, that his grandchildren were too much for a room they had every right to be in. Then I took my kids home. The lake house remains in trust today, exactly as my father structured it, administered by me until my youngest turns 25. Its value at the time of transfer was appraised at just under $900,000. Not $1 of it has gone to any adult in my family, and legally, under the terms my father wrote with his own hand while dying, none ever will. My mother and I speak now carefully, mostly about the children, mostly by text. She has never apologized directly for the Christmas call. She did, 3 months later, send me a card that said only, "Your father was prouder of you than he ever knew how to say." I keep it in the same folder as everything else. Some documents don't need a legal seal to matter. Nathan and Vanessa's engagement ended that spring. I don't know the details and I didn't ask for them. I heard, secondhand, that Vanessa's father had a long conversation with his daughter on the drive home from that dinner, and that whatever was said in that car traveled further than anything I said at the table. Vanessa's father, the one quiet man in that room, sent me a brief, formal email a few weeks later, apologizing for his daughter's comment about my children. It wasn't much. It didn't need to be. I filed it too, not because I needed it, but because some gestures deserve a record even when they don't change an outcome. My father's letter lives in my home office now in a frame, not a folder. It sits where I can see it while I work, which is most days, on other people's documents, other people's quiet betrayals dressed up as family business. I look at it before every difficult call. It reminds me what I'm actually protecting when I do this job. Last month, I used part of the trust's permitted discretionary income, the small annual allowance my father built in specifically for this purpose, to fund a scholarship in his name at the hospital where he was treated. For families managing a terminal diagnosis without the resources I had. It isn't revenge. I want to be precise about that distinction, because it's the whole point. Revenge spends itself on the people who hurt you. This spent itself on people my father would have wanted to help, using money he made sure could never be twisted into anything else. I used to think being the calm one meant being the one who absorbed everything so nobody else had to feel it. I don't think that anymore. Being calm just means you're still standing when the shouting stops, still holding the one thing that was true the whole time. If it reminded you that quiet people keep the receipts and that boundaries are allowed even with blood, take that as your sign. Update what needs updating. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.